Here in San Francisco, a different kind of diplomacy is at work. Inside the small art gallery, Ukrainian artist Alyona Krutogolova's paintings are more than just an exhibition. They are a supply line. Diplomatic uncertainty, political fatigue, and logistical hurdles are making it challenging to deliver aid where it is needed most. The funds raised here will send urgently needed medical supplies to Ukraine. Max is a former tech engineer turned art curator. He walked away from Silicon Valley driven by a vision to connect people through the universal language of art.
Where do I start? So, a short biography. So, both my parents from Ukraine. I was born there, and then we moved to Russia. And about 30 years ago, we moved to the U.S., immigrated. So I'm actually a former techie. I'm an engineer. I stayed at one place for 9 years, kind of thought that there's something else to life than just sitting in the office and doing techie stuff and making big bucks. Long story short, I quit my job basically 6 years ago, 6.5, and I went traveling. I traveled a lot with my cousin and his group. Most of them are Ukrainians. I spent 20 years in technology, and usually when people say like 180 degree from technology, it's hard, right? But it's also kind of interesting too, because as a techie, a lot of problems are easy, right? You like, oh, you optimize on certain things, so they became easy. But in art, things seem to be not easy. Like, how do people create this stuff? They don't need anything. They express themselves so well in this. Long story short, somewhere in the Republic of Georgia, I bought my first artwork on a trip there, and I thought maybe that's what I should do. Maybe I should expose people to different cultures. It was also around the same time people were, how do I say, a lot of stereotypes in the U.S. about people from different places. And so language is a barrier. People from Ukraine or whatever, Nepal speak with an accent, so Americans think different of them. But when you look at art, it's all the same. It doesn't matter what country it's from. It's the language that kind of speaks directly to you. And I like that. But I also want people to actually take it home. It's not a, how do I say, it's a book in a way. It's like you take it home, you learn about it over time. If you like it, if you really like that piece, it forces you to learn more about it, about the culture, about the artist, and just kind of opens your world. But someone introduced me to her work online about 4 years ago, maybe 5. But I felt like I needed to find a Ukrainian artist because in many ways, Russia is an empire that kind of suppresses some of these. So a lot of people think, especially in the U.S., everything is Russian. The reality is there's like so many different ethnic groups, and they all have different cultures, and these cultures have been suppressed in many ways. A lot of Americans know very little about Ukraine, at least knew very little 5 years ago. So I wanted to bring that out. And so to me, her work, I felt, was Ukrainian for a couple of reasons. A is it's bright and colorful, right? Because, I mean, it's bright and colorful and happy, right? And that's to me, Ukrainian, because they're happier people. But also, you know, there's a lot of kind of folklore. Like, I always point people to look at what she's wearing. You see the flowers, the flower crown, and you see the flowers, and you see the flower crown. And so that's reflected in her work. And there's a warmth that's also reflected. I always like look at the way they're holding a lollipop, look at kind of a mom and son or daughter, how they're almost hugging each other. So there's that warmth, I think, that's very Ukrainian in her work. So initially we worked kind of remotely, and then last year I decided to travel to Ukraine because, hey, I'm traveling and I'll visit my family and I'll also meet her. So I went to Kiev and Lviv and Chernivtsi, and I spent 2 weeks. I experienced air raid sirens in Kiev. We had tea. I saw things firsthand. She says that it is sort of a therapy for her, right? Because she can forget about what's happening outside. She still lives there. I talked to her the other day. She woke up with a Russian missile hitting a building not far from her. She could hear it very well. She says it's a very distinctive sound. 2 people died. And so, yeah, she's still there.
Yesterday we saw a complete breakdown of American diplomacy as we knew it for the last couple of decades. Do you have any reaction?
I don't know how to describe it in a couple of words, but of course they're upset on one hand. On the other hand, since I was there, it's difficult for me to, I wrote on my Facebook, it'll be difficult for me to look in their eyes now. So if you look soldiers in Ukraine, they have the American flags in the uniform. I'm not sure they're going to carry those. They have the American flag next to the Ukrainian flag, the two patches. I don't think they're going to keep the American flags on their uniforms anymore. It's, I don't know, it's a critical moment, I think, for Americans to really look at themselves and see who they really are. Like, is that who they want to be? Is he the reflection of all of us, or he's a reflection of himself? By him, I mean the President of the United States, right? We elected him. Some people voted, some didn't. But if he is not a reflection of us, then we got to do something about it, right? If we're here buying things, collecting money, sending it to Ukraine, then we're not. If we're sitting still and doing nothing, then then we're just like him.
While political rhetoric shifts, the needs on the ground remain the same. That's where people like Lera step in. A Ukrainian doctor now based in California, she co-founded Donum Vitae, a nonprofit delivering medical supplies directly to hospitals and patients in Ukraine.
Me, myself, a doctor from Ukraine who moved to US before war started. So I moved in 2017, and when the war actually started, of course it was a big stress, and it was surrealistic, to be honest, because we all refused to believe it's happening in real life. And of course I was on call with my friends and colleagues, ex-colleagues from Ukraine, from Kyiv in particular, and at that time there was a horrible situation. There was no gas at the gas station, and there was no medications, syringes, needles, etc. at the hospitals and the clinic. And there was no way to help them at that time because there's no way to ship it because the airport is not working. All FedEx, USPS, UPS, all those services were shut down for Ukraine at the time. The only way was to find someone in Poland, send it to them, and from Poland people were bringing them themselves through the border to Ukraine, all this medical stuff, whatever was needed. And at that time it was really horrible situation. People were literally living in the basements, in the bomb shelters, giving birth in the shelters, taking care of the kids in the shelters. People who had stoma is basically when your guts or urinary system goes out. So when you have this, you need some kind of special supplies to change it for the hygiene purpose. And the people didn't have access to this at all. So it was a really horrible situation. And at the time I went to Poland, to the refugee camp. At the time, as in a part of the volunteer mission to help people who come in from Ukraine. It was right exactly on the border between Poland and Ukraine. So it was at the first point where Ukrainians reach when they cross the border. And I was in a part of the medical mission, and we gave some medication, some supplies they needed. So I had a kind of a basic knowledge about what people need right now, what stuff they need. And when I came back to home, I told my husband, we need to do something. And the best way to do it is just to establish a nonprofit, because we need support from other people because we don't have enough capacities financial capacities even. So we established a nonprofit, and it was really easy, to be honest. So thank you for the government, whoever was involved in that. That was really easy to establish a nonprofit, and we started running fundraisers like this one. We buy supplies here in US from US companies because one of the best tourniquets to stop bleeding is actually US based. It calls CAT tourniquet. They the best for doing military stuff. And we buy it here, we put it in just the regular luggage suitcases. And we all, whoever help all the volunteers, nonprofits, we gather all the stuff in San Francisco. At one, there is actually 3 persons who do this stuff. They would gather it together, and they ship it with someone who is flying to Poland. So basically it might be like a tourist or someone who's visiting the family and willing to take extra luggage. They're not paying for this luggage. At that time we had a good agreement with United Airlines so that they accept it as a humanitarian aid and they didn't charge for extra luggage. It was like from 10, 11, 20 extra suitcases, which people just like were responsible for. And in the Poland, usually it's Krakow or Warsaw, the biggest cities. People from Ukraine, in particular, it's a Lviv veteran house. They knew when those people arrive. So by this time, they were driving from Ukraine across the border to meet them in airport, help with luggage, load this luggage into the vans, go back to Ukraine, and each luggage has address on this, to whom it's addressed with a phone number. So it was from that point in Lviv, those people who picked up this luggage send it over to Ukraine to those addresses. So it might be just someone personal, I mean maybe like someone brother or father, friend in the military, so they send helmets, medication, whatever. In our case, we send medical stuff to people, and I send it particularly to a person who I trust. She's my ex-colleague, she's my friend, and she's in a good contact with the militaries around, because she's a volunteer herself, so she's going to different areas where medical help needs from time to time in the missions inside Ukraine. So she knows where this like stuff needs, and she like divide whatever I send her, divide those supplies and share between locations, frontline hospitals who need it. So that's how it worked before.
Up until 2 to 3 months ago, the nonprofit was able to deliver these suitcases with medical aid without baggage fees on United Airlines. That policy has now changed. United Airlines is requiring that every suitcase is now paid for, adding another financial challenge to an already complex relief effort.
Now, unfortunately, United Airlines start charging us, so we'll see how it will work. If it's like around 50 pounds, which is amount of the suitcase, you will pay around 250. We tried to look for European stuff. At the time when we were looking for, and there was like first 2 years after the war broke up, so we were not able to find a sufficient stuff because whatever was, they resell in American. Those cat tourniquets is the world quality, so basically all world was using them. That's the best one in the world. So basically they were selling some same stuff but for the extra price, and they also run out of the stock because it's really popular in demand. Because people from Ukraine who doesn't have access to US options, they're buying it from Europe, so basically there's not even an option anymore. They do have alternatives, but this alternatives is less effective. And you know, when you're in the battlefield, and if you had like wound in your leg or arm where a big artery is you have a really severe bleeding, and you have literally like minutes to stop it. So if you try one tourniquet and it's not working, it breaks. You're basically dead. So you don't have much time. So it has to be really, really, really good tourniquet. Otherwise, you put human life in danger because they rely on this tourniquet. They think if I have some wound, I have my tourniquet, I will be able to help myself. Because whenever they lose in blood, they lose in consciousness. So if they lose consciousness and no one around to help them with a second, they have two tourniquets basically in their packs, but they have time to apply only one if this really severe wound. So basically it's really important to provide really good stuff to them. So it has to be really, really good and really safe stuff to use so they can rely on this. Tourniquets, it's Israeli bandages. Israeli bandages applied with the pressure as well, so it can stop bleeding, but not as severe as a tourniquet can stop. So it stops the bleeding, it covers wounds, so no dirt can come in. So it's good for transferring wounded soldiers or wounded civilians. It works for both ways to the hospitals and keep them covered and safe and dry and like all this stuff. And the third thing is the hemostatic bandages, which is the most expensive one. So it is kind of a gauze that's soaked with the chemicals that stop bleeding. So it might be superficial bleeding, it might be really deep bleeding, but those chemicals are similar to what chemicals our body produce to stop bleeding. So basically it's like an extra help to get those wound clotting and like stop the bleeding and again save life. So basically one goal, it's not prevent from bacteria or whatever, it just prevent people from the immediate deaths at the battlefield to prevent the bleeding. And that's expensive stuff. So one tourniquet costs around $25–30. And Israeli bandages are cheaper, they're like $10–15 per one. And the clothing bandages cost around $30–40 per one. So if you want to supply more people, like we usually gather around like $1,000–2,000 per event. And it's usually able to cover like 10–15 soldiers at once only when you buy all this stuff. So even it looks like a lot, unfortunately it is not, because those supplies expensive. And we try to contact the companies who manufacture them and ask for a discount. Everyone say like, we already helped, we already donated in 2022, so we cannot do it anymore. What we can offer you as a free shipment of something, which is usually like $20 or something. So we tried, but we were not able to find any way to reduce the price. Oh yeah, emotions. Of course I cannot tell for everyone, but what I can see, it's the whole mood is better than in 2022. In 2022, everyone was like depressed, really scary, frightened to death, like what's going to happen to us because it was something new. It sounds really bad, but people get used to live in war. And they lost already so much, so they cannot give up. They just need to go until the end. That's their mood. They tired, they exhausted, they, like, probably all people who stayed in Ukraine have PTSD, because that's like affected everyone. But they really determined to go to the end, and we're all hoping that this end will be in Ukraine's favor, not vice versa.
While the funds raised here may not change the course of the war, they will ensure that another shipment reaches the front lines, that another house, hospital, or clinic is equipped with the supplies it needs so that another life may be spared.